All right, guys. I'm going to start the live stream now. For those of you who have questions, don't worry. I am going to answer them at the end of the live stream. But first, I'm going to go over what I wanted to talk about. Some of you are already addressing stuff that I want to talk about anyway, specifically this negotiator that was killed, and about Zelensky talking about going to Poland and everything. I'm going to address all that, and we can talk about it at the end, okay? All right. All right, now to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing, I have several main subjects that I'm going to go through. First of all, I'm going to address the what the title talks about, Russia's special operation and why it's not imperialist nor an invasion. I'm going to talk about that from a Marxist-Leninist perspective. After that, I'm going to talk about reasons in terms of actually existing socialism, why it is not why this is not an imperialist war. I'm going to talk about specifically what Vladimir Putin recently said, who, by the way, a lot of you have been saying I'm just a Putinist. I guess this has come out specifically after the fact that I decided to come out to support this military offensive. That doesn't make me a Putinist, and I don't support everything Vladimir Putin does. Actually, I don't support a lot of what he does. But this is probably the thing I support the most that he did, and I'll talk about it more later. And in connection to Vladimir Putin, I wanted to talk about something he said today. He talked about why he went beyond Donbass with the military offensive, because a lot of people have been criticizing Russia for that, saying that proves it's imperialist and whatnot, but it doesn't. And I'm going to go over some very recent events that happened literally between this live stream and the last one that I had 2 days ago. We're going to go over some of the most recent information. This is going to include Ukraine's former negotiator, who's now dead. And then I'm going to go into my response to Grand Old Gamer's comment, actually. The reason I decided to respond to this was because it was quite a well thought out, long comment. I don't agree at all with the kind of conclusions he came to, he or she, but I think it covers a lot of the main points that people who support the military offensive have been attacked on, and so I'm going to respond to them. And that's basically it. I'm going to go through all that, and then we're going to have time for Q&A. All right? So, number one, why is this war not imperialist? I want to begin this part of the discussion with straight from, actually, Lenin's book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. So, I chose a phrase that's basically in the foreword of Vladimir Lenin's work, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, because I feel like this highlights the main essence of what Lenin is trying to talk about when he talks about imperialist wars. Obviously, his concept of imperialism has to do with a lot more, like monopolization, centralization of capital, and everything. But when it comes to wars, this is completely relevant to what we're talking about right now. He says, capitalism has grown into a world system of colonial oppression and of the financial strangulation of the overwhelming majority of the people of the world by a handful of, quote, advanced countries. And this, quote, booty is shared between 2 or 3 powerful world plunderers armed to the teeth. In this case, Lenin, in his time, he talks about America, Great Britain, and Japan, which were major empires at the time, who are drawing the whole world into their war over the division of their booty. So, this is a very important part of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. I'm going to walk through that quote right now and talk about why this is talking about a completely different situation from what's going on in Donbass right now. Capitalism has grown into a world system of colonial oppression. Colonial oppression. Ukraine, this entire conflict that led to this point. Remember, the war in Ukraine started 8 years ago, and it started with Kiev. Ukraine trying to invade the People's Republics of Donbass that declared independence. This began in 2014 after Euromaidan happened, after the United States, NATO, and Europe supported it and helped it take power and keep power. This basically turned Ukraine, which before was split 50-50 basically. They used to have pro-Russian presidents, pro-Western presidents in the country, in which all of former Ukraine was able to vote in these elections. It was basically split 50-50. This Euromaidan in 2014 is what basically excluded the vast majority of the pro-Russian forces in the country and excluded them from elections. So to say, first of all, that Ukraine is democratic is complete nonsense. But this moment is what made Ukraine part of this definition, part of the world system of colonial oppression. Although its system obviously was already capitalist before then, it became a frontier military colony of the United States. Ukraine became a country that had a future of just basically doing the military bidding of the West and NATO, even though it hadn't become a NATO country yet, but it obviously was trying to be. And that really shows right now, because the United States, when this military operation began, the United States, NATO, Europe, they didn't come to help Ukraine. They said, you're going to fight our battle for us, and we support you in spirit. So right there, world system of colonial oppression. Ukraine had become basically a military colonial outpost for the West. The financial strangulation of the overwhelming majority of the population by the world, by a handful of advanced countries. I don't really think I have to go into too much detail about financial strangulation, because we're already seeing the kind of way that the United States has been putting pressure on Russia for years, and Russia has no way to financially strangulate the West. They have a financial monopoly they have a financial monopoly around the world. They have a monopoly over the financial markets around the world, and this is what allows American sanctions to have such a significant impact on the Russian economy, on what allows the West sanctions to, collapse the ruble, to hurt the Russian economy. This is a clear example of financial strangulation, and it's Russia being financially strangulated by the West. This is clearly this clearly wouldn't be such a one-sided thing if we're talking about two imperialist powers here. Now, the booty is shared between 2 or 3 powerful plunderers armed to the teeth, who are drawing the whole world into their war over the division of their booty. Russia is not getting any booty from this war. This is exactly exactly why this is not an imperialist war for Russia. Russia has nothing economic to gain from Donbass, which really its economy has long been based on the production of coal, which is not even relevant to the world markets anymore, and certainly not for Russia, because it creates it's one of the world's biggest producers of natural gas. That's where its energy production comes from. It has nothing to gain from going into Donbass, and it has nothing to gain from going into Ukraine either. And that's exactly why Vladimir Putin has said that he does not have an occupation planned, that he does not plan to overthrow the government in Kiev, and that he hopes that the government will cooperate and so that Russian troops can leave, and that the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk will remain independent, and that Crimea will remain recognized as part of Russia. Because Putin knows that this war and recognizing the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk are not economically beneficial for Russia. They're an economic harm. You could see the kind of sanctions that it's already brought upon them. And if you were to add onto these sanctions the necessity for the Russian government to occupy Ukraine and make it basically an Afghanistan, like put down an insurgency, which would be bound to pop up if the Russian government were to occupy the country and, hold new elections or whatever, that would be even more of an economic burden on Russia. It does not fall into the category of cutting up booty. It falls into the category of making a difficult decision, that knowing that the country knows that it's not economically a good thing, but making a difficult decision because it has no other choice to protect its own national security as well as the peoples of Donetsk and Lugansk. So this is, from an ideological standpoint, why this military operation and this war in Ukraine is not an imperialist one. Russia does not stand to gain from occupying this land and taking its resources. That's not what we're talking about here. Of course, that is what the West wants. They want to use Ukraine as a military buffer against Russia. And that's also why this can't be considered an invasion. So I understand a lot of people have their own definition of what an invasion is. I mean, there's different logical, there's people with different logical understandings of what it means for an invasion. But I differentiate war from an invasion in terms of invasion being basically a country entering into a country with its military with the intent of occupying it or cutting it up or annexing it, or and that's basically it. I mean, this special operation, the Russian troops are planning to leave. Now, I don't. We have to, unfortunately, because it looks like the Ukrainian government isn't really willing to compromise. I don't think it's 100%. If we can say for sure if there's going to be a military occupation in Ukraine or not yet. What the Russian leadership has made it clear that it does not want to occupy the country and that it would be terrible, and that's not what anyone wants. But Zelensky has shown unwillingness to negotiate in good faith, and if that's the case, I mean, Russia may not have any other choice. But staying on the part about why this war is not imperialist. I gave you the ideological reason right there, and now I'm going to give you the reason in terms of actually existing socialism. What countries that are anti-imperialist around the world have been saying about this? Not just countries, and also parties. First, I'm going to start with the fact that the Russian Communist Party's official position is in favor of this military operation. Yes, there have been people in the Russian Communist Party who have spoken against the leadership. There have been, and they've said that they don't support this operation. And the Russian communists that are within the left front, if you know that coalition of organizations in Russia, have come out against the military operation. They've been saying that they don't want to take a side in this conflict. But the fact is that the leadership and I would say the majority of the largest communist party in Russia and the second largest party, second to the United Russia Party, which the same party which had groundbreaking successes in the last parliamentary election, supports this military operation. And in fact, it was Gennady Zyuganov, the head of the Russian Communist Party, that was the first person in the government Duma to suggest recognizing the independence of Donbass and Lugansk. And this is because of the genocidal acts that the Ukrainians were committing against the people of Donbass for 8 years. It's because of the indiscriminate bombings that they were carrying out against civilians. This is why the communists were the first ones to call for the recognizing the independence of these people's republics. And they also, when this military operation went forward, they supported it. So aside from the Russian Communist Party, I mean, I can give you a bunch of other examples from anti-imperialist countries around the world. The first one I have is very obvious, the DPRK. It specifically said the U.S. and its allies undermined security in Europe. It agrees with Russia's position on this. It says all Russia wanted was security guarantees. And the DPRK knows better than most countries in the world what it's like to try and ask for security guarantees from the West, because it has had the exact same experience with the United States and Korea. It's asked for security guarantees, and the West continually refuses to give it to them because they have imperialist ambitions in mind. And so North Korea has given its support for Russia in this. We have number two. Number two is Venezuela. Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro also said the U.S. and NATO destabilized the situation with a campaign of lies and disinformation. echoing what Vladimir Putin said when he called the West an empire of lies. That's exactly true. He said that Russia aims to protect civilians in Donbass. This is one of the main reasons why the Russian military offensive began. Because let's not forget. I mean, a lot of people are saying like, oh, it has nothing to do with trying to save lives in Donbass. It does. That's not the exclusive reason. I mean, what actually pushed Russia to embark upon this Russian military operation is because the resumption of an offensive by the Ukrainian military first into Donbass, which happened a day before Russia recognized the independence of the People's Republics, and the government's calls to get nuclear weapons on the border of Russia. These are two things that basically aligned the national security interests of both the People's Republics of Lugansk and Donetsk and Russia. That was the turning point. Russia said that it could not permit a hostile country on its border to get nuclear weapons and resume an offensive when it says it lays claim also to Crimea, which is on Russian territory. So, you know, these are the two main reasons why this Russian military offensive began. What else? We have also China, okay? China has been generally trying to stay neutral, but you know, China's trying to be nice with both sides, but at the same time, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has said that it's NATO's continuous negative impact on Russia's national security that gave rise to this conflict. We've also got Syria. It recognized the People's Republic's independence immediately. And then it also said it supports Russia's fight against NATO expansionism and the military alliance's, quote, dirty methods to support terrorists in Syria and Nazis in Ukraine, end quote. Western nations bear responsibility for the chaos and the bloodshed. This is what the Syrian government has said. So this is, I mean, everyone's trying to say somehow that Russia is isolated. And I think it kind of, this idea that Russia is isolated right now kind of comes from the same chauvinistic attitude that on the one hand thinks that all the countries in the West constitute the entire world, which they don't. And number two, the same chauvinistic attitude that has made people absolutely shocked about a war happening in Europe, is calling it the worst thing to happen since World War II, when they had absolutely no problem when NATO bombed Libya, when NATO bombed, or when the United States occupied Afghanistan for 20 years, when the United States killed 1 million people in Iraq and occupied the country and destroyed its government. These people didn't care at that point, but all of a sudden it happens in Europe. This is really a shocker for them, you know. And this is a different argument from saying, oh, the United States gets to invade countries, so why doesn't Russia? That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that it's ridiculous to get upset all of a sudden about Ukraine when you barely cared or maybe didn't even pay attention when these other invasions were going on. And again, this is not even an invasion in that sense of the word, because this was not, there's no occupation planned. There's not a land grab planned. The country's natural resources are not the question of the involvement here, you know? This is a completely different situation. And this kind of goes into what I wanted to talk about next. Why did the offensive go beyond Donbass? This is something that Vladimir Putin talked about today or yesterday. I can't remember, today or yesterday. And this is something that actually I had already been saying before, because a lot of people had said that this is unreasonable because Vladimir Putin went beyond the borders of Lugansk and Donetsk, and it's not. And here's why, okay? First of all, my take on it is because the Kiev government is so hostile, and it has so many neo-fascists in its military. They are actually the ones committing the vast majority of the war crimes near the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. The regular military of Ukraine, actually, the conscripts, they have a lot of them, they've shown a willingness not to fight with Russia. Many of them have surrendered. Many of them have run away and left their tanks and military equipment behind, as we saw in 2014 and 2015 also. People in the West want to say that that's completely over-exaggerated and everything, but it's really not. When I went to Donbass, I didn't see any Russian-provided military equipment there. Actually, the majority of military equipment that I saw with the people's militias were things they took from the Ukrainian military when they abandoned their hardware. So this is another thing that has to be mentioned. And if Russia, this is just what I'm saying, if Russia went only up to the borders of the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, that would mean that this aggressive government that doesn't recognize the independence of Donetsk and Lugansk or Crimea would continue to exist and continue to get even more weapons and training from the West, and potentially even get nuclear weapons, like they were saying they wanted to before. You cannot leave a country like that up against territory that they still lay claim to and say they want to become part of NATO. This is Russia's one chance to defang this completely violent and aggressive government that everyone in the West is saying was not provocative against Russia, that Russia attacked them without provocation. That is the biggest load of nonsense I have ever heard. They have been provoking Russia for 8 years by not following the Minsk agreements that they agreed to, and shelling civilian populations that consider themselves to be Russian for 8 years. That is provocative. That is provocative. So now I'm going to give you exactly what Vladimir Putin said. That's just what I see about the situation. So Vladimir Putin, his official statement for why he moved beyond Donbass, he said it was to prevent the West from endlessly supplying Ukrainian nationalists with weapons. Basically in line with what I was saying just now. They needed to neutralize a real threat coming from Kiev and NATO. Exactly what I just explained. They said they were going to get nuclear weapons. That's absolutely insane. And they resumed an offensive after years of saying that they want Donbass and Crimea back. Those are the main reasons why Vladimir Putin said that he needed to take the offensive farther beyond the limits of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics. And that's completely justified. And even taking the offensive farther, Russia, again, I can't say it enough, is saying it does not want a military occupation. And to be honest, it looks like Ukraine really understands that, and that's why they're not negotiating really in good faith. Because if they can't come to some sort of negotiated truce that's going to end the hostilities, and Russia has to overthrow the government, then it's going to have no choice but for military occupation, and literally nobody wants that. And this also has to do with with something else actually that I'm about to get into when I talk about my answer to Grand Old Gamer's comment, because one of the parts had to do with the fact that I said that in my previous video talking about how Russia was not going to invade Ukraine, I put a comment there saying that there will be a new video talking in detail about why this video that I made does not contradict reality, and it doesn't mean that what I said was wrong, actually, because the situation entirely changed in a way that nobody expected it. And I am going to make that video still, so keep a lookout for it, because he made a new video, the same guy we responded to, and it's absolutely crazy as well, and we're going to respond to it. But why is it that nobody expected the fact that Ukraine was going to say that it was going to get nuclear weapons and resume its offensive against Donetsk and Lugansk. At that point, before when nobody was expecting that crazy kind of rhetoric from Ukraine, Russia didn't have plans to invade Ukraine. And as long as Ukraine continued simply accusing Russia that it was going to invade and simply making Russophobic nonsense in the Western media, Russia wasn't going to invade over that. But the fact of the matter is, they crossed the line, Ukraine. It crossed the line, and it endangered the national security of Russia, and that's what brought Russia to actually embark upon this military operation. And also, it's not an invasion because it's not a land grab, like I said before. I'm going to go into recent news, and then I'm going to get back into that, and also my address to Grand Old Gamer. Let's talk about this member of the Ukrainian delegation to Belarus that was killed. So basically, Ukraine has been going through several rounds of negotiations with Russia, in Belarus specifically, to negotiate different things. They haven't come up with that much, with anything that profound. They came up with putting together humanitarian corridors so that civilians can leave, but we'll get into that in a second. This guy's name is Denis Kireev. He was a member of the Ukrainian delegation, like I said, to negotiate with Russia. And after his return from the first round of talks with Russia and Belarus, he was arrested by the Ukrainian secret services and on suspicion of betraying his homeland. On suspicion. There was no trial, no evidence. On suspicion. The Ukrainian security services killed him like a dog. There's a picture of his bloodied, shot-up body lying on the ground, going across the media. Now, why am I saying it not reportedly? Because I wasn't going to bring this up to begin with because these were just reports at first, but the Ukrainian government confirmed it. And so, just to give you an understanding of how the Ukrainian government is treating its own people right now, that we know of, at least, because we've seen a lot of other videos of people being shot in the street in Ukraine because they weren't in their homes during curfew. This is, it's a completely crazy situation right now over there. But that's basically the background of this guy. We don't have any other information. Ukraine confirmed that he was killed because he was suspected of betraying his country. So that's that. So another thing I want to talk about, we can talk about the humanitarian corridors now. So one of the results of the negotiations between Russia and Ukraine right now has been the establishment of humanitarian corridors. What are these? What does this mean? These humanitarian corridors are supposed to be basically highways or pathways in which civilians can leave areas that are being heavily fought over between the Russian forces and the Ukrainian neo-fascists that are bombing bridges as they retreat, that are killing civilians like it's absolutely nothing. The most significant one, and the one that I can talk about a bit, is the one that's coming out of Mariupol, which, if you don't know, it's been a highly contested area in the Donetsk People's Republic since basically the beginning of the operation. And so they agreed upon this humanitarian corridor, and the Ukraine and there are reports that civilians are not being let out. Just today, it was confirmed that not one civilian had left or been able to leave through the humanitarian corridor that was created as a result of these negotiations from Mariupol. And I've seen videos on the internet, and I'm gonna say I'm not able to confirm them, but I have seen videos on the internet of that are purported to have come out of Mariupol that show Azov Battalion and Right Sector troops not allowing civilians to leave. And to me, this doesn't surprise me, and I think it's true. But I'm just letting you know, I haven't been able to independently verify that. So this is what these humanitarian corridors have to do with. They're not really working in practice, but maybe they will soon. Now, the last thing in terms of the news I want to talk about is Western media being shut down in Russia. Unless you've been living under a rock, Russian media has been shut down across the Western world, and the West was the first to do this. RT and Sputnik They've been shut down all across the European world. There are some exceptions in the United States. I'm pretty sure you can still watch it on the internet or whatever, but it has been dropped by a huge number of cable and satellite providers that work in the United States. And so, in retaliation to this, so we can't really say that this is like some Russian totalitarianism. They're basically saying, you block our media, we're going to block yours. In retaliation to this, Radio Free America, banned. Can't say I have a problem with that. BBC, which is basically state-funded British propaganda, banned. Can't say I have a problem with that either. What else we got? Deutsche Welle, German state-funded propaganda. Can't say I have a problem with that. ABC, CNN. All of these outlets that have been banned, and you're going to laugh at this one, all of these outlets that have been banned in retaliation to the banning of RT and Sputnik have decried the move as censorship of independent media in Russia. These people really want us to believe that Radio Free America is independent news, BBC is independent news, Deutsche Welle is independent, ABC, CNN, these are like, corporate, these last two are corporate-controlled media. None of these outlets are independent at all. They have their own editorial boards with their own capitalist interests that control them, and they are accountable to them. So it's absolutely ridiculous to say that some sort of suppression of independent media is going on here. And that's all I'll say about that. Maybe we could talk about it more when I go to Q&A later. What? All right. So, Grand Old Gamer, thanks a lot for your comments. They were pretty well thought out. And like I said at the beginning of the video, I specifically decided to address the main points in these comments because they really went over the main criticisms that liberals and people from the West have been giving people who support this military operation. So I wrote down a bunch of thoughts that I have in relation to specific parts of parts 1 and 2 of your comments, Grand Old Gamer. I'm sorry, I can't find the third part anywhere. But we're going to begin. Now, so the first part I wanted to talk about was regards the fact that in my last video, my reaction to that guy from Vox, I said that large parts of the population in Ukraine and Donbass would welcome Russian troops if they enter the country. This is something that I guess you thought was ridiculous and untrue, but I still stand by what I said because that's exactly what happened. I didn't say all of Ukraine is going to welcome Russian troops with open arms, but I'll give you a bunch of examples. First of all, the Lugansk and the Donetsk People's Republics, they were more than happy to receive the Russian military. Snake Island, have you heard of that? The entire Ukrainian military installation on Snake Island surrendered voluntarily without a shot fired. Another example is the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where the Ukrainian military that was stationed there immediately surrendered and agreed to even work with the Russian troops that were going to be stationed there so they could defend the Chernobyl exclusion zone together. And basically the last part that I wanted to mention was the initial advance on Kharkov region. Now, Kharkov is a city and it's a large region as well. The city of Kharkov has been was contested heavily. There was heavy fighting there, but when the Russian military entered the eastern region of Kharkov, the eastern part of the region, they walked in without a shot being fired, and people celebrated them coming in. So large parts of the population did actually welcome them into. Did welcome them. They didn't oppose them at all. So this is one of the points listed in the comments. Another thing about that is that you also said that a bunch of communists don't support the operation. There are communists who don't support the operation, but there are also a lot that do. This is kind of split the left, I would say. But you know what? I really think in all over the world, this is kind of unmasked and a lot of fake leftists and separated the wheat from the chaff, really, because we see the biggest example I can give you is like bread tubers. Like Vosh went from being this like edgy libertarian socialist who was like, I believe in communism and socialism, but I'm not a totalitarian. He went from saying that to putting a Ukrainian flag on his Twitter handle and basically openly supporting NATO, calling for Russia to be destroyed. He's an active supporter of imperialism now, and this is really what kind of situation has developed for all these leftists that were calling themselves, I don't know, democratic socialists or libertarian socialists. They're all just liberals. They've proven that in their reaction to this. And real anti-imperialists have taken the side of, that all of the anti-imperialist governments in the world have basically taken at this point. So, that's what I wanted to say about that. Also, yeah, okay, so that's on Grand Old Gamer's part about large parts of the population welcoming Russian troops. The next part I wanted to talk about is, I guess you thought I was trying to mock the Ukrainian military. I wasn't. I was saying that when I was talking about the training of the training of insurgents in Ukraine, when they were giving people, ordinary people, guns and training them on how to use them in preparation for a Russian invasion before before they started saying that they were going to get nuclear weapons and everything, I said that was ridiculous. I said those were unwarranted measures for unwarranted hysteria, and I still stand by that. That was ridiculous. And you also said that this is the end of Russia because you think they're not going to be successful in this military campaign, but I have to tell you that Russia is the second largest military in the world, and Ukraine does not stand a chance. If Russia wanted to wage war against Ukraine in the way that the United States wages war against people, it would have wiped the floor with them in one day. Kiev was surrounded by Russian troops. The reason why they are not conducting war like this is because they don't hate the Ukrainian people, number one, and number two, goes back to what I said before. They don't want a military occupation. They don't want to overthrow the government, so they have all that nonsense to take care of. You said that this is I'm quoting you here. You said the most illegal war since World War II. Going back to what I said before that, it really just goes to show how Eurocentric your analysis is, and how it comes from kind of a chauvinistic point of view. Because I have to say, if you compare what Russia is doing to Ukraine right now with the Korean War, the Vietnam War, they both came after World War II. Those are just two examples. I mean, you could also talk about the Iraq War, Yugoslavia. You could talk about any of those. They're a lot worse than what's going on right now in Ukraine, and they came after World War II. But it seems like you decided to ignore the deaths of people who are outside of Europe, which is, it's really the same kind of thing we're hearing when people freak out about the Russian military operation in Ukraine and never even knew that Libya was bombed to hell by NATO. You also talked about the protests a bit. This is an important point I wanted to address. You said nobody wants this war, in Russia specifically even. There are protests going on, but they, to be honest, have been very small. We're seeing smaller protests than we saw back last year when Alexei Navalny was trying to organize against coronavirus. Protests have been going on and people have been getting arrested for organizing unsanctioned protests. And personally, I don't think people should be arrested for simply organizing unsanctioned protests. That's my opinion. I think it's wrong. But still, the kind of scale of these protests is so much smaller than what you're probably seeing in the Western media. You also brought up the fact that Russian police are arresting kids. I looked into what you were talking about. I found basically one instance of this, and my response to it is that parents should not use their children as political tools. They should not put their children in harm's way by bringing them to an unsanctioned protest where they know people are going to get arrested. It's completely irresponsible. It doesn't matter what side you're on. I don't agree with that at all. And that's completely wrong. So, there you go. You also said that I'm getting a political directive from the Russian government to not call this an invasion. Let me just make one thing clear. This is my personal YouTube account. I am a communist, a Marxist-Leninist. The Russian government is not communist. Putin is not a communist. He's a capitalist, and I don't agree with everything the Russian government does. And the Russian government doesn't tell me what to say on this channel, and that's that. I mean, my life as a journalist at RT is different from my life as conducting this kind of independent journalism on my YouTube channel. And I like both of them, and I don't regret anything I do on either of them. But I've never been told what to say ever, even at RT, and I never will say anything I'm told to say. On that note, it's my personal opinion that this is not an invasion, but that it is a war, and it is a Russian military operation as well. And if you've been following what Roskomnadzor has been talking about in relation to what's going on in Ukraine, they don't want media outlets to even call it a war. And yet I still call it a war on RT and here, because I say what I want, and nobody's given me any trouble for that. So there you go. It's my personal stance. You also said that Russia is an aggressor, that it attacked Ukraine without provocation. This is another thing that I just mentioned earlier in this broadcast, and if you weren't there to see it, I'll repeat it. Ukraine has been very provocative over the last 8 years. In 2014, a violent coup d'etat backed by the United States, NATO, and Europe came to power that excluded that led to the exclusion of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics, well, the former Ukrainian regions, that had to declare independence because they didn't want to be part of this neo-fascist-backed government. And so, ever since they declared independence, the Ukrainian government has been attacking them. They are the ones who began an invasion. Lugansk and Donetsk, they declared independence, which is, they held legal referendums. This is legal according to the Ukrainian constitution. And instead of respecting the wishes of the people of these two former Ukrainian regions, the new Ukrainian government said that they were just controlled by Russia, that they were Russian separatists, and decided to invade them, and said that they were occupied by Russia. And Ukraine went into these two former regions and occupied half of their land. And ever since then, until the beginning of the Russian military operation, those two people's republics had only controlled half of their original regions because they were occupied by Ukrainians. And then they carried out a genocidal campaign of indiscriminate artillery shelling of military and civilian positions alike. They did this against people who considered themselves Russian. They consider themselves Russian in the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, not in terms of what government they serve, but in terms of ethnicity. And Russia saw them as their people, but outside of the bounds of their own government. And Russia didn't want to cause more problems for itself by attacking Ukraine after this happened. And so for 8 years, it tried to get Ukraine to abide by the Minsk protocols. And they revised ceasefires and the Minsk protocols and everything 29 times. 29 times the ceasefires were renegotiated to try to make it work. And it's only after Ukraine renewed its offensive and said it was going to get nuclear weapons the day before this Russian offensive that basically put them over the line. And that is why Ukraine has been provocative this entire time. Ukraine is the provocateur here. It's not Russia. Russia's done everything it can to be diplomatic, even farther than personally I think it should have. So I think that's like completely ridiculous to say that Russia is the provocateur here. And I also think it's completely ridiculous to compare Putin to Hitler. This is like some liberal fanaticism. That's absolutely ridiculous. Another part of your comment, you said that the invasion serves Putin's interest, but then right after you said that, what was interesting, you said that you don't understand why it's doing more harm than good for Russia. I'll answer that for you. It's because the offensive is not in Putin's best interest. It was undertaken out of necessity to protect the national security interests of Russia and of the People's Republics. It's not because it's in Putin's interest. Putin isn't getting rich from this. In fact, Putin's had sanctions put on him. And you said Putin's a capitalist. That's correct. But I don't see your point, because we can compare this to World War II and how in World War II the Soviet Union fought alongside capitalist powers in a war against Nazi Germany. Would you say that World War II was an imperialist war between the imperialist powers of the Axis and the imperialist powers of the Allies? No, that's a ridiculous thing to say. Only like crazy ultras and Trotskyists say that. The United States and the UK in World War II played a progressive role, of course. And there's two things we have to consider here: the subjective conditions that played into this and the objective conditions. The subjective conditions for why the United States and the UK decided to join why the United States specifically decided to join the war on the side of the Soviet Union is that the Western capitalists' plan to pin Hitler against Stalin failed, because Hitler was a wild card and he turned around and attacked the UK as well. So the capitalists were like, okay, we have to get in bed with the USSR to fight fascism. So that's the subjective reason, Yeah, it's totally messed up. It's not like they were like, we want to defend the glorious people, the glorious Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. No, but it doesn't matter the subjective reason. The objective reality is that they were fighting a war of liberation against the Nazis. And this is a very similar story, actually. It's not, this is another reason why it's not an imperialist war, but a war of liberation. Because Putin is a capitalist. He's not a communist. But he's not he's not getting any sort of capital or land or anything out of this good. Actually, the economy is suffering because of it. He's entered this war because Russia has basically been forced to actively defend the national security interests of the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, and as a consequence of that, the war that is being waged against Ukraine is a war of denazification. So they have to take out the Nazis of the country. It's a war of neutralization of Ukraine, so that it doesn't present a threat to Russia anymore, and that it doesn't join NATO. So it's a war that, if Russia wins, is going to weaken NATO, and it's not going to increase the economic gains or anything of Russian capitalists. This is why it's a war of liberation. And it's also ending 8 years of indiscriminate killing of men, women, and children in Donbass. It's a war of liberation, not a war of imperialism. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say about it. This is basically why this war is not an imperialist one. I gave you the very ideological reason for it, in terms of what Lenin wrote about in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, at the beginning of the video, and I gave you the practical, objective reasons connected to the current state of affairs in that country right now. So if you missed it, sorry, but we can always watch the recording afterwards. Right now, I'm going to spend the rest of the time that we have That's just about 10, 15 minutes, because we're going to have a Patreon live stream right after this that I have to get on. And if you want to get some exclusive insight into where our documentary on Donbass is going to be going after these events, after everything that's happened, it's really dramatically changed the way we're going to go about this documentary now. Become a patron. Join us on Patreon. You could become a rank-and-file revolutionary for $5 a month, commissar for $15, or a general secretary for $30. Any tier you choose is going to be really appreciated, and you'll be able to participate in these direct Zoom calls with me and my associate, who's also on the Politburo of this channel, and we'll have some exclusive footage for you to show you right after this, and some very important news. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time addressing some questions now. So let's see. Let's see. This war was a reaction to the U.S. cornering Russia. Exactly. Questions? Does anyone have questions? If you asked them earlier, there's no way I'm going to see them. Does anyone have any questions? Just write them in the chat. I'll take a look at them. No questions? Well, that kind of makes my life a bit easier because I got to get on this Zoom call soon. Let's see. Have you heard of the Ukrainian former official who claims that NATO planned to attack Russia with nuclear weapons later in 2022? No, I haven't heard that. Sorry, I can't comment, and I haven't heard about it. Am I in Russia? Yeah, I'm in Moscow right now, for those of you who are new to the channel. So I've been actually, I was actually at the border with Donbass, working at RT, covering the refugee or evacuee situation right before the Russian military operation broke out, and I was covering it there. And I was there when the military operation started. Actually, we were bombed near where we were. So so there's that. But now I'm in Moscow, so I'm still following the situation really closely, and that's where I'm broadcasting from now. What do you think of China not using the word invasion? Can China save the Russian economy? China doesn't use the word invasion because it's not an invasion, for the reasons that I listed before. I think China is going to become a bigger part of the Russian economy now that these sanctions have been put on Russia. But what the West doesn't understand is that we're going to get through these sanctions. You know, they kind of suck for now, but whatever. Last time there were sanctions in 2014, Russia responded by developing its domestic industries. It's only going to help Russian businesses, to be honest. What are your thoughts on Putin's recent statement that the continued may call into question Ukrainian statehood, the continued operations? Yeah, Dylan, this is a good question. This is something actually that I mentioned earlier in the video. It's connected to it. It is going to call into question Ukrainian statehood, unfortunately, and nobody wants Ukrainian statehood to be put in question, but Zelensky is basically pushing the government into this position. He's making demands when he's in no position to make demands right now. The Russian military is completely encircled Kiev, and the reason it's not completely trying to seize it is because it's still relying on negotiations. But if Russia feels like negotiations are going nowhere, then you know, unfortunately, what's going to happen is an overthrow of the government and perhaps military occupation, which nobody wants to see. It would be terrible. But for Russia, what would be even more terrible would be to just surrender and go back. That would be even worse. Do I refuse to believe the rocket attacks on civilians with no military target in place is true, or are you trying to tell me that it's Ukrainian rockets hitting their own apartments? I've seen a lot of stuff going around on this subject. Collateral damage is a part of war. I'm not going to sit here and say that the Russian military has killed no civilians. I don't believe that. But the fact of the matter is, and what I do believe, is that Russia is not specifically targeting civilian infrastructure, and they're not trying to kill civilians. There is a difference between that and what the Ukrainian neo-fascists have been doing over the past 8 years, where they have been targeting deliberately civilian infrastructure and people to make sure they live in a state of fear. And as they've been retreating, because the Lugansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic have been advancing, they've already advanced many kilometers in the direction of Kiev. Lugansk has advanced, I'm pretty sure, almost 100 kilometers already. The Ukrainians, specifically the neo-fascists, have been blowing up everything they leave behind. They've had a scorched earth policy. And there is already documented evidence that they have been destroying civilian infrastructure and killing civilians. That is 100% true. Are Nazis using human shields? Definitely. They are. Russia has, in Kiev, Russia had been trying to, Russia publicly declared that they secured a highway out of Kiev so that civilians can leave, and the Ukrainian officials did not let anyone leave through that corridor. There, again, in Mariupol, the humanitarian corridor that they created after the Ukrainian and Russian delegations agreed to create it, the neo-fascists are not letting civilians out. So they are using them as human shields. All right, guys. I would go on longer answering questions, but unfortunately we do have a Patreon Zoom call scheduled for right now. So I'm going to have to get off and go directly onto that. But I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Thanks, thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks for your questions and everything. I hope I gave you a lot of updates that I wasn't able to talk about in the last live. And I'm probably going to go live again soon, because it seems like we're getting a lot of updates day by day. But make sure to become a patron if you want to join us on the Zoom call right after this and see some exclusive footage of our documentary and understand where we're going to be taking it from here. So again, everyone, thanks a lot for joining us, and workers of the world, unite.